Hello everyone, I'm Ariel with Urbanist and welcome to another installment of Hidden History. And no, we are not in Scotland or France or Rome yet. This castle is in the middle of Manhattan, right by Central Park, in the neighborhood of Manhattanville, which is right above the Upper West Side and in between Harlem. However, this castle was never a fortification nor a military structure. It has a much deadlier past. Join me today as we explore the history of this castle and then go a few blocks north to explore one of the most greatest American heroes to have ever existed, Frederick Douglas. Let me know where you're watching from and let's get on walking. So right now I'm in Central Park West, 106th Street and Central Park West, right by all the schists and rocks that you see from the park. The benches are all along this road, people running, buses passing through, taxis zipping through. It's a beautiful place to come for a walk, especially during the summertime. However, a lot of people don't know the history of this impressive building right in front of us. I came here on the live video a little bit more than a year ago after I did a tour of Houdini's New York. And I was so astonished by this structure. I had no clue what it was. And this is something a lot of people don't know about because it changed radically about 15 years ago when it was restored into modern condominiums. But before ever was modern condominiums, it has a very, very dark past. And this was, well, before I say the name of it, let me get into what happened in 1884. New York City. Only a few blocks away at 66th Street, President Ulysses S. Grant was diagnosed with throat cancer. This shook the nation because this was one of the most famous men in America at the time. See, the sightseeing buses are passing by through here. Hello, Nina, your favorite place in the world, Central Park. Yes, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous place. This is the building we're going to investigate today. Look at these huge turrets, 5 turrets to be precise. There's a chapel, and there is a smokestack. Something's off about this building. Smokestack, a chapel, 5 turrets. This is not a French chateau. This is not an armory. This was something that shook the nation after Grant's cancer scare. By 1884, almost no one knew about the disease. It was mysterious. People thought it was highly contagious. Some people even believed that you got it from committing sinful acts. But having President Ulysses S. Grant being diagnosed, people started being more aware of what cancer was. They wanted to know what this disease came from. Now, at that time, a lot of people didn't know actually what cancer was. It was still very mysterious. The first mention of cancer ever was 2500 BC in papyrus texts from ancient Egypt. Now, they mentioned some form of malignant tumors that grew off people in the era, but it was very rare. Then zoom about 1,500 years later to ancient Greece, and ancient Greek philosophers called cancer karkios, which was the ancient Greek word for crab. And it's because when a tumor grows, all the veins start popping out and they look like crab legs. But then again, it was also a very rare disease. Zoom later into the 1800s, If you were caught having a tumor, it would be something kept hushed away in secret. There was no surgery, so there was no way to really cut off the tumor. You would have to live with it or die from it. And if you died from it, no one would ever know what you died from. People would say, oh, he died of old age, or he died of a heart attack, or he had an accident somewhere. This wasn't spoken about. It wasn't spoken about for many decades, all the way till the 1930s, 1940s. So what was the U.S. to do after one of the most cherished presidents in U.S. history at that time, the most famous man in America, the man who saved the Union Army against the Confederacy, Ulysses S. Grant? What were the people to do in order to battle this unknown mysterious disease? Well, a man by J. Sims was a doctor who was 100% determined to find at any cost a cure for this disease. And J. Marion Simmons gathered some of the wealthiest elite of New York City. Hola Isabel. Sure, I'll speak a little bit in Spanish. Estamos ahora en la parte arriba de Manhattan, en esta cosa que se ve como un castillo, pues no era un castillo, era algo diferente, y lo voy a explicar ya mismo. So look at the beautiful architecture. Gracias Isabel. I'm here. What's around you, Peggy? So a little bit of geography. We are 106th Street and Central Park West side of Manhattan. Uptown Harlem is the next neighborhood down. Upper West Side is only a few blocks away. That's where we're located. And this huge castle encompasses half a city block. We're going to walk all the way around it. Right now we're at the 106th Street side, and we're going to walk one more block around. But let me show you a little bit around before I continue the story. Hello Bernard, hello Isabel, hello Charlene, hello. So this is 455 Central Park West. It's a French chateau. No, it's not a French chateau, though it is designed that way. And look at these huge, massive turrets. Okay, you're looking forward to the story. Crazy, says Arlinda. You lived in New York City your entire life. You'll visit tomorrow. Amazing, Arlinda. Nina from Spain, welcome. Hello, Edward. Hello, Lou. Hello, Denise. Oh, I'm so happy so many people are tuning in. Welcome, everyone. Nice to see you here. So let's go a little bit further here. Look at these huge windows. It's huge, 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 huge building. And there's a garage that links back into the tower that is a part of this complex. So let's walk around to the front. Actually, maybe we can investigate something here. Maybe you can see the smokestack. Let me jump in through here. So here we're going through the back, just so I can show you the tower and the back part. And this is one of the 5 turrets. Now, why are there so many turrets? Why is there so much round architecture in this rather French chateau looking building in Uptown Manhattan? Well, J. Marion Simmons gathered New York City's elite. Names like John Jacob Astor, one of the richest women, Elizabeth Kuhlman, and many, many others, in order to donate to fund the building of the first ever American cancer hospital. Now, how was cancer treated before this hospital was built? Well, this was built in 1887, a mere 3 years after Ulysses S. Grant was diagnosed with cancer. He passed away by that time. And he had a huge funeral and a huge tomb built in his honor in Uptown Manhattan. Dejan, this is indeed New York City. Yes, we are in New York City. There's a beautiful little fountain in the front. The weather looks great, and there is rain and clouds in the UK. Indeed, there is. New York City has had good weather. Hey, how's it going?
Ain't got me in here, you heard?
How's it going, man?
He's in Central Park West.
Yeah,
this is the best side, the west side.
Oh yeah, man.
What's your name?
Ariel.
Ariel?
Yeah.
My name is Gamma, you heard?
Gamma.
From right here, 107. Hit me up, Manhattan Avenue.
What's your top pick here? What's your
top pick
place?
on the west side?
Yeah.
Oh, Mama's Pizzeria. Best pizza in the city.
Okay, cool, man.
Best pizza in the city, hands down.
Awesome. Check out Urbanist Live.
Urbanist Live?
Yeah.
My channel is Time Machine, you heard? Cool. GXMMX. Check me out. God Gamma Vision Landing. Yo,
awesome, man.
Blessings, bro.
Have a good day. You too. All right. So, I love meeting New Yorkers. See, I told you New Yorkers are very friendly, just like me. How do I decide what I would share live? Well, it's a process of just being inspired. I just try to search history and just try to find things I'm inspired by. So 1887, J. Marion Simmons gathers the funding from New York City's elite to build this hospital. This is the New York Cancer Hospital, and it was designed by architect Charles Coolidge Haight. Charles Coolidge Haight decided to design this in the French chateau style. Now, why in the French chateau style? Well, at that time, hospitals weren't like the modern day hospitals that we know today, designed more like an office building or a mall. Before, they were designed more extravagantly. The reason for that is because hospitals needed to gain wealthy patrons or wealthy patients so they can fund the running of the hospital. At the time, right at the very cusp when surgery was being innovated, a lot of people in the medical field didn't know too much of what they were doing, especially treating very deadly diseases like cancer. But the second reason is, no hospital wanted a cancer patient. No hospitals wanted patients of any deadly type of disease. The reason for that is, in that time, in the 1800s, hospitals in America needed to publish their death rates. So more people died in the hospital, the worse ranked the hospital would be, the less chances any wealthy patron would go to this hospital, and hence no hospital was taking in patients of terrible diseases like tuberculosis. So you start having tuberculosis hospitals, or basically hospitals where people just passed away. One of such hospitals was covered in one of my previous episodes, the smallpox hospital in Roosevelt Island. It was a hospital where basically people just went to spend their final days, pass away. And this was one such hospital. No other hospital wanted to take in cancer patients, so we needed the New York Cancer Hospital. It was the second cancer hospital in the world, the first one being in London, the London Cancer Hospital. However, the construction of this hospital was a debacle from the very beginning. And the reason for that was Elizabeth Clumman was one of the wealthy patrons who funded this hospital, died of cancer just a few weeks before this opened. And then a few weeks later, John Jacob Astor III, another of New York City's elite that funded this hospital, his wife passed away of cancer a mere 2 weeks before this opened. They were hoping that they could use this hospital to cure their illness, and they were unable to. So let's get into the design. Charles Haight designed this into a French chateau style in order to attract wealthy patrons, so you can keep the hospital running. But why the huge turrets? Why so much roundness in this hospital? Especially nowadays when hospitals tend to be square buildings. And you can see, definitely French chateau style, grand entrance in the front, though now it's fenced off. The grand entrance has been moved off to the side. These are condominiums, private residences, so you'll see people here minding their own day. And the huge balcony right over here. And Dejan says it looks like the castles in Dubrovnik. Yes, it does look like these older castles during the Gothic era. So let's go over here to the side. You always find great things to explore. Oh, I'm glad. Well, this is what hidden history is all about. It's finding those very, very interesting things you won't find in the guidebooks or you won't learn in the textbooks. So, disease, 1800s. How did we combat it? Well, one belief was that disease was spread through air. Makes sense. A lot of diseases are, like the common cold. However, many diseases aren't, like cancer. It's not even contagious. So they believed that all diseases were spread through air, and because they were spread through air, they had to have good ventilation in these buildings. So these buildings had to have the air flow through. The second reason is because they thought that corners held disease. Corners weren't well ventilated. Corners could hide dirt and mold and other creepy crawly things. So hospitals in the mid-1800s avoid corners at any cost necessary. They didn't cut any corners to not build with corners. So they built these huge turrets as the main wards for the patients. And that's why now you have these, or when it was originally built, you had these huge turrets, these very round sections, 5 of them, in this building. Now, to this day, corners are rarely seen in hospitals also. Not in the exterior of the building. Exterior of the buildings are now rectangular, square. But if you go inside any hospital room, go down all the way to the very bottom of the floor, between the floor and the wall. And what you'll notice is that it's always curved. And still a practice used till to this day. Usually they have like this piece of plastic where it's like curved. That's how they curved it out. So, why the smokestack? Well, that's where things get very tragic. So let's see if we can get a good shot of the smokestack on the other side. Roswitha says, thank you, best wishes. And Kay, you say the rents are very high. Yes, I will get to the rents very soon, so stay tuned. That will be towards the end. And here's the beautiful backyard. Oh, wow. So here we have smokestacks. Large smokestacks. That's, I think, the bigger one right here. Now wait a minute, hospital with smokestacks? Must have been later. No. After this building was a cancer hospital, it became a elderly home. Smokestack wasn't built then, nor was it built in modern day. Smokestack comes from the cancer hospital. And the reason for that was, I mentioned earlier, the death rates that hospitals needed to publish. Also, the cancer really had no known cure at that time. People were still kind of in the dark of how to cure cancer. Marie Curie in 1921 actually visited this hospital, and she is the only woman who has won 2 Nobel Prizes, one of them for her innovation in radiation therapy for helping treat cancer. She visited this hospital herself. But even then, this was the very early stages of radiation therapy. This was also the very early stages of surgery. So they cut tumors, but the tumors will grow back. There can only be so much cutting you can do. By 1920, all around the world, especially here in the US, 85% of cancer patients did not survive more than 2 years. Whatever age you were, no more than 2 years, 85%. That's only a mere 15% survived more than 2 years. Most of them would die within 5. That meant this hospital had a whole lot of people passing away. And the smokestack was the crematorium for this hospital. Because they thought this disease could potentially have been contagious, highly contagious. They didn't want to take any risks in taking these dead bodies out to another location, maybe a pauper's field like Hart Island, or maybe a graveyard like Greenwood Cemetery. So they would cremate the bodies that would be right here. And you can just imagine being a resident from 1887 all the way through 1937 when this hospital was in service. All these people around here looking on a daily basis, smoke pluing out from this French chateau looking building. Must have been a scary sight. So what ended up happening to the hospital? Well, by the end of World War I, radiation therapy was starting to gain steam. And a lot of these older beliefs, and surgery was already commonplace. A lot of these older beliefs of having round corners, of having these French chateau-looking buildings were replaced by buildings that look more like office buildings. Also were inspired by skyscrapers. And also they were done without any wooden cabinets or wooden sidings or flooring. Everything would be metal and plastic. The reason for that was because they wanted to create an atmosphere of first sterility. So they wanted to make sure the place was clean and was easy to clean. Wood sometimes absorbs germs or bacteria. Sometimes it absorbs fungus. And the second reason was they wanted to have better facilities. So this was replaced with Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Hospital, which is nearby and still highly regarded as one of the top cancer hospitals in the world. So after this kind of laid abandoned for 20 years until 1950s, it was made into an old person's home. However, the conditions here might have been even worse. Let me say a little bit in Spanish. Esto era un hospital de cáncer en los 1887 hasta 1937 y desafortunadamente muchas personas murieron aquí y lo estaban quemando los cuerpos, y aquí era donde pasaba el humo afuera. I just basically said in Spanish what I just said in the past 10 minutes. So as we start walking towards Frederick Douglas, let's talk a little bit about what happened with the old person's home. Actually, let me show you a little bit more of this. But this was an old person's home for about 2 decades. And the treatment inside was apparently one of the worst in the entire city. This was infested with roaches. Apparently the entire building had this horrible pungent smell to it, and no one really knew why. and it was closed down for good by the city because the reports were too bad to let it stay open. Then, for the following 30 years after that, it laid in complete ruin. The ceiling of the turrets fell down, and people passing through this neighborhood on a daily basis thought it was haunted. Might have been. But in early 2000, it was bought out by a developer, and in the early 2000s, it was made into condominiums, taking the original intention of having a place for wealthy people to stay in this French chateau style building to finally being a French chateau style apartment. And the most expensive apartment here was sold for $8 million. I think it has around 16 units, along with the towers that have many more units above it. And it also has a pool, 24-hour concierge service, and many other amenities. However, this area started becoming very popular because one very famous musician settled in here. And he decided to come over here in 1999, just when this area was starting to kind of go on the up and up. And that was Phil Collins, who bought an apartment nearby here for $3.5 million right in this block. And this is why the chateau was end up being kind of restored, was getting that notoriety from celebrities moving in this area. I'm going to show you a little bit of the backyard, and let's go to the statue of a man who worked closely with Ulysses S. Grant, the man who started this tale today. So this is the backyard of this beautiful French chateau building. It may have a dark past, but at least it's living a bright future. So, yeah, I could assume that while people might have the concern that it is haunted or that has bad vibes. However, I was reading an interview with the developer who bought this estate many years ago, back 15, 16 years ago. Actually, a little bit more than that, almost 20 years ago. And he said that if you think about it, cities like Rome and Paris have these buildings that are hundreds of years old, sometimes up to 1,000 years old, and they have been reused for many, many decades, sometimes for far worse circumstances. And people are okay with living in these older buildings in these cities. So I think that is one good way of thinking about it. There's, unfortunately, not to sound too grim, there's death everywhere, just like life. With all life, there is death right next door. And there are the people passing through, and here's the chateau from far away. And yes, people are living here. These are now almost all occupied. The apartments run to buy anywhere from $3 million to $8 million. I think they might go a little bit higher if they were to resell. They might be worth around $12 million now. And they own the tower right behind it. All right, now let's go and investigate the statue of Frederick Douglass, which I can see right there in the distance, a mere 2 blocks away. Annie says, great to tour with you. Thank you so much, Annie. Is the smell gone? Yes. It smells very nice. You can smell the park. You can smell the trees blooming. The subway right beneath my feet right now on the subway grates. Yeah, the smell's gone. The smell was gone a little bit more than 20 years ago. if you're enjoying this video, like my page or follow Urbanist here on Facebook, and you'll see more videos pop up. In the description, you'll see a link to getting notified when I go live, and also a link to my New York City book recommendation of the week. I'm recommending books with every Hidden History episode I do. Sometimes I repeat them, but this time this is a different book. It's about the hidden architectural gems of New York City. And here are the gorgeous apartments. There's another hospital nearby, Mount Sinai. And here are the gorgeous apartments right by Central Park West. Usually anywhere there was torture or abuse is going to be haunted. Yeah, the cancer patients were not, luckily, tortured or abused. Unfortunately, maybe that was the case with the old person's home, with the elderly home. But when it was New York Cancer Hospital, there was no reports of that. People died because the disease itself was very mysterious, and a lot of the ways to combat it was very primitive still at that time. Goes to show how far medicine has advanced in a mere few decades, or 1 century to be precise. Mari, you say, great page, love following your adventures. Thank you for all the info. There's my sirens. Good point about death being everywhere. Yep. When you think about it, when you start learning about nature, which I've been doing recently because I've been very interested in it, every single life form grows out of the dead things that passed away on its own ground, or the fungus that feeds off the dead plants, feeding back to the alive plants. Cast iron in front of these buildings. And here we're approaching Frederick Douglas Plaza. Now, for a little bit of context on American history is unfortunately marred by a very terrible thing that happened for most of its early half of American history, all the way until the 1870s. Slavery was here, and it was the second to last country to abolish it by the 1870s, the last being Brazil, about 10 years afterwards. And one of the men who was in the forefront of battling battling slavery and then battling the effects of slavery was Frederick Douglas, which we're going to see his statue right over here. Now, this plaza has been entirely remade back in around 2006 to build this new monument to Frederick Douglas. And of course, as I mentioned, property values are rising in this neighborhood of Manhattanville, so you're starting to see new condominiums pop up. Now this is Frederick Douglas Plaza. People are taking photos by him. And here we see this fence that is made out of spokes from a chariot wheel. Here are the buildings surrounding it. And here we have constellations. Constellations with a quote on them that light up at night. So if you come here at night, these constellations light up. I'll get closer. It says, the types of mankind are various. They differ like the waves but they are only one like the sea. And the water overflows over here. So these constellations all correspond to the North Star. Big Dipper and Small Dipper, all part of the North Star. And the North Star was used by the Americans in order to find their way up north to the free states of America. In America during the mid-1800s, 1840s, 50s, and 60s, America was divided into between free states where slavery was already abolished, not allowed, and between the slave states where slavery was common practice. The free states were mostly concentrated in the north of the United States of America. States like New York City, New York, Washington, D.C., etc., further up in New England. And a lot of American slaves sought freedom. And they would use a system called the Underground Railroad, which I talked about in Hidden History Episode 4 with Harriet Tubman being one of the leaders of the Underground Railroad. Now, the Underground Railroad wasn't an actual railroad. It was just a system of outposts where the slaves can go and get support in order to move up north. Sometimes they would take horse and go up secretly in the back of carriages, and hence why we have this fence made of horse carriage spokes, wheels. One such man that sought his own freedom with the help of his future wife was Frederick Douglass, a man who was raised and lived as a slave for the first 20-something years of his life. Now, Frederick Douglass was a unique man because growing up as a slave, he had the unique opportunity to learn how to read and to write. First, his mother was one of the very few African American women in the entire area that he lived in that knew how to read. However, his mom passed away very early when he was a very young boy. And the wife of his slave master decided to teach him how to read and write. The slave master highly disapproved of this action, but she did it anyway. And so Frederick Douglass in his early formative years was one of the very few African American men to learn how to read and write. Throughout the rest of his life, he continued to learn by himself how to read and write. And by his mid-teens, he was starting to teach other fellow slaves also how to read and write. Until one day, after being beaten nearly half to death by one of the slaveholders, he decided to make an escape. So he left the confines of his plantation and sought after the North Star in the woodlands of the South, and continued following the North Star, getting support from the various outposts on the Underground Railroad until he reached New York City. And in his book, that he wrote subsequently at the age of 27, he said when he reached New York City for the first time in his life, he felt truly alive. For the past 10 years was nothing compared to that one day being in New York City, knowing that he can finally taste freedom. Now, if you study American history, you probably recognize his likeness a lot. He has a hand on a pedestal. Now he he was the most photographed man in early American history. More photographed than Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, or any other man at that time, or Walt Whitman, who was another very famous man in America. He was more photographed than any of them. Over 160 portraits were made of Frederick Douglass. The reason for that was he wanted to break the stereotype of the African American, break the fear that people had of African Americans, bring a human face to white Americans, to know that these people were real people in the South still suffering. He also never smiled in any of his photos because he wanted to break the stereotype of the happy slave, which was a terrible stereotype done in minstrel shows here in New York City and many other major cities in the US. Minstrel shows are where people use blackface in order to perform as an African American stereotype. And usually they'll be happy and smiling, kind of saying, oh, they're more than happy to be a slave. He wanted to break the stereotype, so he always had a very serious face on. He also supported the women's suffrage movement and was the very first and only African American in attendance of Seneca Falls, which was one of the very first conventions of the women's suffrage movement that took hold in the mid-1800s, around 1840. And Frederick Douglass continued fighting the fight all the way until he reached the White House. Because I mentioned earlier, Ulysses S. Grant, one of the most famous men in America back in the mid-1800s, he became president because he was so famous for being the general who won the Civil War, or was one of the generals who won the Civil War. And Ulysses S. Grant greatly admired Frederick Douglass and made him the U.S. Marshal, official U.S. Marshal. So he had an official U.S. position in the White House, and Ulysses S. Grant and the following 4 presidents to Grant were said to have sought counsel from Frederick Douglass. He also wrote some of the most popular books of the African American experience of that time, which are still read till this day in many American high schools. So Frederick Douglass, before there was a Martin Luther King, he was the man who sought to have equality between all people here in the U.S. Not just all men, African American, white, Chinese, etc., also men and women. So much so that his second wife was one of the most prominent suffragists as well. And that's Frederick Douglass. Just like another man here to save the U.S. And it's so wonderful to see him being recognized in a beautiful plaza here in New York City. And where is his photos published? You can search in Google and find his photos everywhere, or basically every American textbook. And here's one more quote, which I'll read. Right is of no sex, truth is of no color, God is the Father of us all, and we are all brethren. He wrote this in the masthead of the North Star. Now, the North Star was such a pivotal impact for Frederick Douglass that he named his newspaper, which he wrote a lot about the abolitionist movement, and also helping African Americans in the South recover from slavery, and the suffragist movement. He all made a newspaper called the North Star, which he was the editor-in-chief. So thank you everyone for watching this episode of Hidden History. I'm Ariel. This is Urbanist, a channel where I explore the history of cities all around the world. If you want to see more videos like this, follow and like my page, and you'll be notified whenever I go live. Down in the description of this video, you'll find links to my book recommendation of the week, which is The Hidden Secrets of Manhattan's Architecture. Also, you'll find recommendations for my best coffee shops and how to get notified when I go live. Stay tuned every 1 p.m. on Urbanist on Saturdays as I go live for Hidden History. Keep being awesome, and always keep on exploring. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye. Bye. May you rest in peace, Frederick Douglas. See you soon.